character that has evolved from episode 1 to episode 13. You still don't know who he is because he's a mystery. You don't know what his true agenda is. How would you best describe him?
I think the coolest thing about the character is a few of us, many of us had conversations before this when you guys had only seen episodes 1 to 7, and there was literally nothing you can say because Luke Cage is a show that, as much as it's one album, it's really like two shows. It's episodes 1 to 7, and then 7 to 13 is another whole show. So for me, in the beginning, it was a lot of patience. Same with Eric, where it was like everybody was led to believe this thing of the big bad was going to be Cornell, Cottonmouth, and this was the way the show was going to go, and that everybody else was going to, how was this going to work? Mariah was just a politician, and Shades was just some dude who was kind of weird and whatever, and we didn't know anything about, DB, Diamondback. So what I love about it is you never saw this guy coming, and the way it ends is this guy's in this for the long game. This is the long run for him. This is a long game. He's playing a very long game here. This is a marathon. And the way it ends is you had one guy who was on a quest for revenge. You had a reluctant villain in Cornell who didn't want to be a villain. And then all of a sudden, you have this guy who, from Seagate days, had one thing in his mind, which was power. Always wanted power and was going to get there. And I think that Alvarez Shades has been playing this game forever. And I think all the things that happened, every little thing that went on through basically 7 to 13, even the beginning, he planned. He had in his mind. And whether some things happened better than he planned, by maybe Diamondback being more revenge thirsty than he thought. I think that, and then Mariah, finding someone that he can really take him to where he wants to be. I just think it makes for such an incredibly interesting character, and I'm super honored to play it.
We don't know much about him before the Seagate days, which is, I think, rare. With most other villains in the show, we've seen our childhood.
Yep.
So, were you told any more background information about him, or did you mix him up to kind of give yourself something to play from?
Yeah, Cheo's the most collaborative person I've ever worked with, bar none. I also, he's so incredibly smart, like me. He's a comic book geek. We have that in common. And then also, the other executive producer and writer on the show is a guy named Charles Murray, who was back from my Sons of Anarchy days. He was on our show there. So I was able to get as much information as I could possibly get in the world of Marvel. You know what I mean? Shades, we know, was in the original comic. We know that, he knew him before it. Now in the comic, they used to run in a gang called the Rivals, with Willis and Luke and Comanche, but we didn't, that has never been brought up. This was just, he knew him from Seagate. So they had a prior relationship. What I had to figure out in my head was, he knew Cornell before it. They grew up together. He knew Mariah. How? We don't know yet. He looked up to Mama Mabel and what was going on there. He was this street kid. I've always, the way we concocted him in my mind was that, and Cheo and I talked about that, he was just this street hustler who watched all these bigger people who were running Harlem, from Mama Mabel to Pistol, to Cornell coming up. He watched them in awe, and he started plotting, I believe, from day one. And like I said, it was a long game for him, but I'm really interested because I think the way it ends, Luke's in jail, Diamondback's in the hospital, Cornell's in the morgue, and him and Mariah are sipping on mimosas in the club. I don't know who came out more successful in the whole thing. And Misty got, she's in a lot of trouble with the police department. So I think he did all right for himself.
You mentioned that you and Charles Murray were big comic book fans.
Yeah.
How much did you know about Luke Cage? People always say they've read it, but how much did you really know about Luke Cage compared to the other comic books we've now seen in the movies now and so forth? Like, why couldn't Luke Cage be in the theaters as opposed to the series?
Okay, well, first of all, if you're just in the world, like I was a big Punisher reader, I was a big Wolverine reader, I was a big X-Men reader. You're always going to run into, you're going to run into the Defenders at one point. when you're reading Wolverine, he's crossing over with Captain America. So then eventually you're going to lead somewhere down to Iron Fist and Luke Cage, and they were never nearly as written as much as other characters. What stood out so much was, one, New York City. Okay, you have any character from New York City, I immediately gravitated towards because I grew up here, grew up in Staten Island, reading comics. You could ask anybody from the Woo as well, because they're all comic book heads too. When we immediately saw characters that were not just based from New York City, but that were real people. They weren't aliens from another planet, they weren't whatever. That's where you usually put most of your stock into. For Luke, why doesn't he end up in the theaters? Why doesn't someone like, well, Punisher, they tried to go in the theaters and it didn't work. You know what I mean? I believe that the game has changed tremendously. I'll say this, not just because of the last show I was on, coming from this to this show. I think the best stories, the best drama is being written on television. I think that films have become bigger and larger. It's not so much about the story as much as it's about the spectacle, especially in the superhero world. So what I feel is that I couldn't be happier that Luke's story is being told on television, because we get to tell an important story with many issues, with many things about a place that nobody's ever telling a story about. So why isn't it in the movie? We should be thankful that it's not in the movie, because it probably wouldn't have done the justice that was done in just one season of Luke Cage, with here. So just why does Punisher work now? Why does Daredevil work now? Why does Jessica Jones, Alias, I never read Alias, I knew the comic book, I never read it. I knew about it. Why did she become one of the most compelling women, if not the most compelling woman on television, and arguably one of the greatest series on television that's winning all the awards? It's because you get to tell the story over a 13-hour movie. But if you do a 2.5-hour movie about Luke Cage, and it's not done right, and it's a big spectacle, and it bombs, and we don't see him again, we lost our opportunity. So I couldn't be happier that it's on Netflix.
Can you walk outside the house in shades without being talked about differently?
My sunglass days are over. This is it. And I said,
what about during the summer when you're walking out?
I know, I'm in trouble. My eyes are going to be tortured for the rest of my life, and I'll tell you why. When we first got on this, when we first did our first photo shoot, they were bringing me like these box of sunglasses. They're like, so you're gonna, you're wearing sunglasses on the show? And I was like, oh, I just thought that was like his name. Like, I knew from the comic book, like he had on the big visor, but I thought it was just like some shady dude. I didn't know it was gonna be like Cyclops or anything. So they started bringing me all these sunglasses, and some of them are like wraparound Oakley, some of them are this. I wear black Ray-Bans in my personal life, so I know. We all know with glasses, it takes a long time to get the ones that fit your face, that kind of work, that you can roll with every day and feel comfortable with. It took me a long time to get to those black Ray-Bans. I went through a lot of phases before I got to those. So I've been rocking those for a couple of years. So I finally convinced them these are what I'll wear to be the coolest on the show, not knowing that they would take away them in my personal life.
So the shades you're wearing are Ray-Bans?
They're the black Ray-Bans, yeah. They're the black Ray-Bans.
Model? Is it a certain model? Is it just regular Ray-Ban?
No, it's those forward front Wayfarers.
Okay.
Yeah. So now I'm like, those are what I wear. Those in the tortoise shell. So I'm gonna have to start sticking to the brown tortoise shell ones. But I don't even know, because I'll tell you this: we aired Friday night, 3 a.m. Eastern time in New York City, in Eastern. I had an event in Coney Island for a friend at 2 p.m. And when I got there on Saturday, not many hours later, like 6 people came right up to me and were like, yo, Shades, that show was amazing. They were like, I can't believe the end with Mariah and this and that. I'm like, how did you watch the whole thing? Did you not sleep? Are you on drugs? Who stays up that long? Like, how did you do that? And not, like, are they on Vibrant or something like that? Old, like, how do you stay up and drinking a lot of Joe Cola or something and watch all 13? So that showed me that I was in a different world with Marvel and with whatever. So, yeah, I think if I wear sunglasses, I'd be in trouble.
Shades is so mysterious. Is there a possibility we may see him on the other series?
I would love to, man. I mean, I say that, not just as a fan, but as I think, obviously the dream collaboration is with Wilson Fisk, seeing them two together and fitting in the world of the Punisher and all that. You never know. I mean, the way these things work, and you guys know this, man, you don't know anything, and for good reason. I mean, as a fan myself, with social media, I mean, they have websites that spoil TV.
Even with Misty Knight, you kind of get an idea.
For sure, yeah. I mean, she's, look at that character. I thought she was just, her and Rosario, but I just thought the way Simone played that character was so outrageous. I mean, and she beat my ass too on the show. half too, which maybe not be too believable, but they did hit me with a monkey wrench. So but it was just. I just think that where these people could wind up. That's what's the beauty of this. For me as a fan, when I see Turk Barrett show up, I'm like, oh, it's so cool, right? Like how cool is that? That Turk is from the first episode of Daredevil to here with us, and it just shows how small the world is. I'm the guy who geeks out when they talk about the guy with the hammer, or the guy in the big green guy. I geek out with that because I'm like, you don't realize that we're in the same world as Tony Stark. We're in the same world as, we're all in this world. We're just on this street level hero, which makes it so interesting. So who knows? Who knows what's going to happen in the future?
As a New Yorker, how cool is it for this show to be filmed in New York?
I just moved back. I was gone because of Sons. I was splitting most of my time. For 15 years I was in LA because I had done a bunch of shows before Sons that were all LA based, and I basically was spending the majority of my months out there. I was out there, sometimes 10 months a year. So when I came back, it was 4 years ago, not even 3 years ago, and I came back, and I hadn't fully been back because Sons wasn't over, but I had bought my place, and first thing I realized how cold it was here. It was freezing here. But when I came back, literally, it had to be a couple of months later, not even, that Luke Cage came up. Being a fan of Daredevil, Jessica Jones had just come out. Working in New York City as an actor, it's everything. Because if you're a fan in the history of Hollywood like I am, New York is the tableau of the greatest films, the greatest stories. It's the capital of the world. So to film here, and more importantly, to film in Harlem, you're my age, you grew up here, you went to Harlem, you knew you were in a different place in New York. It almost makes me like nostalgic because, especially for a Staten Island kid growing up, Staten Island is its own unique world. Brooklyn was its own unique world. Manhattan was its own unique world. And even though Harlem wasn't a borough, it felt like one because it was its own unique world that felt so different, and it looks different. The streets are wider, the buildings are lower, everything was different. So for us, the studios in Brooklyn, we do most of our exteriors, if not all of them in Harlem. For me, I'm a kid in a candy store. I literally can't ask for a better situation for me.
What
is the one thing, or like the one life lesson you want people to take away from your character?
Don't sleep on people. Don't sleep on characters in the Marvel world. When you see somebody come in, you just never know how long they're going to be there, what their importance is, what their role is. I think what we show different from every other show. I think the closest I saw to this was in Jessica Jones, was the neighbor. The character started off, with the drug problem and all that, and how prominent he became. I'm losing the character's name right now. Malcolm?
I think maybe I might be done.
I'm going blank now.
It sounds well, we all know who we're talking about.
Echo, I think it is.
But that was kind of like that, where you're like, oh man, look, and he almost becomes like basically a hero at the end in what he's doing. I think with these characters, especially where first to do with the villains, where it's like, you just had no idea what was going on, and I think that that's so intriguing about this world and these characters and how rich they are, how diverse they are, and how you just never see people. They're so three-dimensional, and with Shades, there's just so much that we don't know, but there is so much that we can piece together of what he's coming from and what he's doing.
What do you have after this? Are you shooting series, films?
Yeah, so I have my film Lowriders coming out for Universal, my first, huge, big studio film that I'm going to lead in Cinco de Mayo? No, May 12th, 2017. We're about to move on some other things right now, and then, we got to hope we get greenlit for season 2 of Luke Cage, which...
What would you like to see for your character if season 2 happens?
My only job as a character right now, and I have a film out right now called When the Bow Breaks, and it's like the same thing. Like, my characters, and he's like one of the most repulsive characters I've ever played on film in that film. But it's like I have to make people somehow have like him. what I love that I've been getting hit on social media with is that people are like, man, I really want to hate Shades, but I kind of like him. My thing with that is, for the next season and what we could be with the future of this, is to keep that seesaw going, where he seems like sometimes that he's not such an awful human being because he just has this quest for power, but then he takes Candace out at point blank range and doesn't even think about it. So I don't know. I just like to keep that ambiguity of what people feel for the character. I like that.
Thank you.
Thank you.